G'day, my name is Pete. You're watching Ahead of the Curve and thank you for tuning into the channel. So I woke up this morning, it's Monday the 31st of August, only to find that the feed-in tariff, the solar feed-in tariff, has been slashed. The solar feed-in tariff is also known as the buyback rate, predominantly by our incumbent electricity retailer here in Western Australia. It's what the consumers receive in exchange for selling power back to the grid. It's mainly solar PV owners selling excess solar electricity back to the grid and getting paid 7.135 cents, which has been the case for a number of years now. The scheme has worked phenomenally well. It's been a great success. Now that feed-in tariff has been slashed to only 3 cents for the majority of the day. For a small period of 6 hours between 3 p.m. and 9 p.m, it's actually gone up to 10 cents. Now this will apply to, it's effective immediately as of the 31st of August, so it will apply to all new solar PV systems. All the solar PV systems will be grandfathered, or there'll be a they'll be classed as legacy systems, I presume. So you'll have, as an existing solar PV owner, you'll have an option. So you can either opt in to the new time of use feed-in tariff, or you can decide to stay on the existing 7.135 cents. If you're lucky enough, like myself, to have put a system in, close to 10 years ago, you'll still continue to receive for another 6 months or so, roughly, until the 10 years is up. You'll continue to receive your 40 cents in addition to the 7.135 cents, or the additional 20 cents, depending on when you installed your solar PV system. So that remains unchanged. The question is, it's been a great success. It's worked really well. If it ain't broken, why fix it? Well, why are we making this change? Well, the answer is because it is broken. Not the system, not the way it's worked. What's broken is the electricity grid. And the reason why it's broken is that our network operator, call it, you can blame it on whoever you like, AEMO, state government, Western Power, whoever you wish to blame it on. We haven't kept up with the influx of solar PV into the system. We haven't firmed up renewables with the most popular way to do that is with battery storage. So now what we're trying to do is, the idea is that we incentivize consumers to try and shift their production to the later part of the day, which is when the grid is at its peak. So let's first of all have a look at why the grid is broken. The problem with the grid here in Western Australia and in other parts of the world as well is the duck-shaped curve. So look, it's not unique to WA. Some will argue that it is. Look, perhaps in its scale it is, but it is prevalent in other states in Australia as well as in California, for instance. So this is the duck-shaped curve. So what we have on the horizontal axis here is time during a typical day. So that's midday, in the middle of the day. So as you can see, this resembles the shape of a duck. So think of that as the tail, or the feathers on the tail. That's the belly, and that's the top of the head. So the idea is that what's been happening is as people wake up, they start to use electricity. So you have a little rise in the morning. Then you have a fairly low trough in the middle of the day here in WA, and then you have a sharp peak, quite a high peak at the end of the day. The problem with the duck-shaped curve is twofold. There's a problematic region here, or problematic time period there, and there's a problematic time period there. The problem is that there's a threshold here, whether that threshold is 800 megawatts or 1000 or 1200 megawatts. If you start going below that threshold, and there's already forecasts that if solar PV take-up continues at the current pace, we'll be at that level, in 3 to 5 years' time. So if we get below that threshold, then the grid becomes unstable, because this grid was designed several decades ago. It wasn't designed with zero load on the grid. There was always an assumption that there would never be a period any time during the year or any time during the day when everyone would turn everything off. There was always an assumption that there'd be some sort of minimum base load demand on the grid. So the grid basically hasn't been designed to operate at those low levels of demand. The opposite problem of this is not enough demand, and that's the other problem that we have during late evenings, particularly during our hot periods, because the largest demand on the Western Power or the WA grid is air conditioners or HVAC systems. And that's the biggest single load on the grid. And the period, so our peaks used to be between 2 and 6 p.m. And that's because there'd still be air conditioners that would still be on in the workplace, but some people will be starting to come home and turn on those air conditioners, and that'd be that overlap when both the industrial and the commercial HVAC systems were on and the residential air conditioners were being turned on at the same time. That peak used to be between about 2 or 6 p.m, but it has shifted to later in the evening. And the reason why it shifted is because of this. It's because of solar PV. So when solar generates its electricity, its generation profile resembles that of a bell-shaped curve. So in the morning as the sun rises, you start producing more power, then it peaks during the middle of the day, and then it starts to taper off later in the afternoon. And this is really the opposite of this. So this results in this. So prior to having a large amount of PV in the system, during the middle of the day we had a fairly flat demand. In fact, we even had a little peak during the middle of the day, but that's been offset by solar PV. Obviously, if you're producing your own electricity, you don't have a need to buy more electricity from the grid, so the demand on the grid drops. So that's a problem there. This is also a problem. We've been able to arrest most of this problem in WA over the last several years, and the way we've done it is through the use or through the investment into what are called peaking power stations. So these power stations only come on and provide electricity during peak periods on the network. And you know, the vast majority of the year, they're really just sitting in the shadows and providing reserve capacity. So they're ready to meet capacity at a relatively short notice. So a coal-fired power station might take 20 hours plus to reach its spinning reserve. The peaking power stations are mainly gas-fired power stations. The fastest one in Kwinana can reach its spinning reserve in about 5 minutes. So that's relatively fast compared to a coal-fired power station. It's an eternity compared to a battery, which can start to generate or feed power back into the grid within, virtually instantaneously. So as a result of not investing in battery storage, you could say that 5-7 years ago we had no option, and that's fair enough. We had to invest in this peaking power station. The problem is you're paying tens of millions of dollars for these things to basically just sit around for the vast majority of the year, and they might these things might only turn on for a few minutes or a few hours every year. So it's really not the most ideal way to invest your capital into something that you really don't get much use out of. So really the only use that it provides is the security of knowing that if there is not enough generation capacity in the grid, these things can come on during peak periods and provide these peak power, which, like I said, it's not the ideal way to do things. You're better off investing in batteries. In fact, that's exactly what the whole purpose of this time of use feed-in tariff is. The idea is that if you only pay people 3 cents to export their electricity during the middle of the day rather than 7.135, they're less likely to do so. And the idea is that they'll feed in power during the period when it's most needed, and that's when there'll be an economic incentive to do so, which is 10 cents. The question is 10 cents between 3 and 9 p.m., is that really an economic incentive? I would say no. And I'll prove it to you. So let's say you're considering a Tesla Powerwall 2, which is a second generation Powerwall battery from Tesla. That's got a capacity or storage capacity of 14 kilowatt hours or 14 units of electricity. Let's say we'll look at the most optimistic scenario. Let's say you can charge that battery right up to 100% before 3 p.m. And let's say you can discharge the whole lot of that battery and you can pump the whole 14 kilowatt hours back into the grid and get paid 10 cents for that. So you're receiving $1.40 a day. If you can somehow do this for 365 days of the year, multiply $1.40 by 365, you get $511. The question is $511 enough to go and get you to go out and buy a battery? Well, yes, on the margins it is, and in the short term, yes, this may lead into a spike in demand for batteries, but I will argue it will really only be on the margins and in the short term. Because, look, fair enough, if you're looking at buying a battery already and you're fairly close to making a decision, this might just be the last little bit that you need to get you over that threshold to go ahead and purchase a battery. But or you might be a consumer, and for consumers generally residentially, the economic incentive might not in some instances be the number one consideration. It is for whether companies admit to it or not. I've been in this industry for 10 years, and I know that commercial customers, the number one thing in their mind is the economics and the environment, and there are other legitimate reasons, and most of them are completely legitimate, completely genuine, and I would support most of them. One is being more self-sufficient, or the feeling of having more independence from the grid, which is absolutely completely legitimate, completely fine, doing the right thing by the environment, a fantastic cause. But really, if you're serious about trying to instigate some sort of a meaningful shift in consumer behavior, you really do, and we've learned this over, we've learned this with solar. If you give someone a economic incentive, you make solar a no-brainer, which it has been up until now, and which it is still, although to a lesser extent, it's a bit of a no-brainer. People go out and buy solar PV. It's been incredibly popular in Western Australia. 300,000 households have opted for a solar PV system. Our take-up has been second only to Queensland and South Australia. So we've done really well. And that's part of the issue that we have with the duck-shaped curve. But solar PV has been a real success because there has been a real economic incentive to go out and buy a solar PV system. But if you're looking at a battery and $511 is your benefit, even in the most optimistic scenario over a whole year, then you'll probably, if you're rational at least, you'll probably make some sort of a cost-benefit consideration. So the benefit is $511. What's the other side? What's the cost? Well, Tesla Powerwall, I haven't looked for it quite a while, but it's probably $10,000, $12,000, $14,000, $16,000. Call it $14,000. Is $511 on $14,000 enough to get you off your seat to go and buy a battery? I will say no. Reason being is, like I said, reason being is that $511 on $14,000, that results in an 18-year payback period. No rational person is going to accept an 18-year payback period on a product that's only guaranteed to last 10 years. It's a completely different scenario from a solar PV system where you can have warranties, and there are panels with most product warranties, by the way, are 10 to 12 years. 12 years is the most common for panels, and roughly about 10 years, 5 to 10 years for inverters. But there are inverters and there are panels out there with 25-year product as well as performance warranties. So you've got a 25-year performance and product warranty for your solar PV system with a 3 to 5, 6 year payback period versus a 18-year payback period with a 10-year warranty. I mean, it's not going to stimulate anywhere near the demand that we need to firm up renewables with battery storage. I would argue it's not really fair. I can see what's being, the idea is here that we try and incentivize people to invest in the network through their own batteries. I would argue that's not the right thing to do. I mean, it's not the role of the consumer to be firming up the grid. It's really the role of the network operator and, the generators and pretty much the system as a whole, not the consumer. And really, this is the view that the South Australian government has taken. They've invested in the now world famous Hornsdale Tesla power packs, which they've been absolutely phenomenal success. There's been days where those batteries have saved $1 million, and some will argue it was a 30 to a 60-day payback period. So it made perfect sense, and I completely support that. Absolutely. That's what we should have been doing over the last 5 years. We should have been investing in battery storage, and then we wouldn't have had any of these problems. But that's been and gone, so we can't look back now. So, you know, is this the right way to go about trying to fix this issue? I will argue no. So what is the right way? So yes, we can now look at investing in grid scale or utility scale batteries. But if you feel that it shouldn't be the taxpayer paying for this, it should be the solar generators or the solar PV owners, well, okay, fair enough, you're entitled to that opinion. I wouldn't necessarily agree, but let's assume that you know, that's the right thing to do. Well, even then, don't be, you know, even then, if you really want to incentivize people buying batteries, then do it properly. Do it like they did in South Australia. So not only have they invested in grid scale battery storage, they've also incentivized consumers properly to do it. So they've given them a, you know, anywhere between, so, you know, if you really want people to get off their couch, you need to give them $1,000, $2,000, $3,000 towards the cost of buying a battery. By shifting your feed-in tariff to a time of use feed-in tariff, it's just not, you know, in fact, it has potential, whether it's intended or unintended, it has potential consequences, you know, for everyone else. So what does it do? Well, it potentially makes the payback period, well, it does make the payback period shorter, especially if you're not looking at a battery. Even if you're looking at purchasing battery, either way, it makes the payback period longer as a result of these changes. And really, it feels like a bit of a step backwards. So, I mean, obviously, I don't agree with it. Obviously, you know, have I got a solution? Yes, I do. What I think we should be doing, and this is what the solar industry has been saying for quite some time, we should be incentivizing electric vehicle take-up. And you know why? Because it absolutely, you know, it's an absolutely perfect fit, especially for the duck curve problem. So what do most vehicles do at night? Most cars are parked in the garage, so they can be soaking up fairly cheap electricity because we have quite low demand, and we still have generation at night. We still have wind farms that are producing electricity at night. In fact, for the third time in Western Australia, during the day, we had a negative electricity price. What does a negative electricity price mean? It means that you get paid for consuming electricity. I've got a 75 kilowatt hour battery in my Tesla Model 3. Even if I was to discharge even if I was to charge only half of it, it means I would get paid $37.50 for charging half of my battery if I was able to access the negative $1,000, which was the wholesale electricity price. I can't do that because consumers don't have access to the wholesale electricity price, although there is a retailer in the eastern states that's trying to give consumers access to that, but that's a topic for another video. What I'm trying to say is that EVs are a perfect fit. So you could be charging them at a very low rate when there's plenty of excess demand in the grid during the night. You could be and then you could use that energy in the battery to drive yourself to work or to drop kids off at school. And then what does the car do during the middle of the day? Well, it's probably sitting at your workplace in the car park, or if you're a stay-at-home person, it's sitting in your garage again. So you could be using that battery to soak up all this beautiful solar generated electricity. You know, if you've got a Tesla with 500 kilometers of range, or any meaningful BEV, or even a hybrid with quite a lot of range, you've got more than enough to, you know, my Tesla Model 3's got 500 kilometers of range. The average person drives 40 kilometers a day. So there's plenty of charge left to not only get you at home, pick up the kids, run your errands or whatever you need to do, but there's plenty of charge left to be able to discharge that battery to be able to meet this peak in demand. Obviously, you need what's called vehicle to grid technology. That's already here now. The Nissan Leaf, for instance, has that capability, so it can discharge its batteries to put power back into the house, and you can obviously charge as well. So this is technology that's here and now, and we could be taking advantage of that right now. And like I said, it would be a perfect fit, not only to fix this duck-shaped curve problem, but there's other problems with the grid as well. It could fix those. It could, you know, 2,500 to 3,000 people die of air pollution prematurely every year in Australia. That's more than the national road toll. So, you know, EVs don't pollute the environment. So, you know, that's obviously a great benefit. The road toll as well. So EVs are inherently safer. So not only is there no engine in the frunk, so it means that you have a much bigger crumble zone if you actually get into an accident. But there's EVs naturally more advanced when it comes to accident avoidance, especially the Teslas, so you're less likely to be in an accident. In fact, Tesla publishes its safety report every quarter, and according to the latest numbers, these are US numbers, but if you were in a average vehicle, your chance of being involved in an accident would be 1 in about 400,000 from memory. But if you're in a Tesla, then I think it's 1 in 2.5 million, something like that. But if you're in a Tesla that's an autopilot, I think it's 1 in 4.5 million. So you're 10 times safer in a Tesla on autopilot than you are driving a average car, and you're also 10 times less likely to have a fire in a Tesla than you are, or in an EV. But in a Tesla, these are Tesla statistics. So 10 times less likely to have a fire in a Tesla than in an internal combustion engine car. Although when there is a fire in a Tesla, it's spread all over the news and everyone hears about it, but we don't hear about the other 500 fires that day. So yes, there's numerous benefits to EVs. They do support regional tourism. The big benefit of EVs is we essentially have no EV industry here in Australia at the moment. We could generate a whole new industry with tens of thousands of jobs, and these would be sustainable jobs in both senses of that word. So sustainable in that, good for the environment, but sustainable in that the government wouldn't have to put its hand in its pocket again in 3 or 4 years' time to try and resuscitate this job and keep it alive. In fact, every dollar spent on generating a new job in the renewable energy sector goes 3 times as far as it does in the fossil fuel sector. So a dollar spent on new jobs in renewable energy creates 3 times as many jobs as it does in the fossil fuel sector. It's, as you can see, I think EVs are absolutely the solution for this, not playing around with the feed-in tariff, which really isn't a meaningful way of either stimulating the demand long term or in a sustained manner or in a meaningful way. Look, no doubt people have done their numbers on this, and I might be proven wrong. This is just my opinion, but I don't think this is going to lead to any meaningful change of people going out and buying batteries. If it does anything on a net basis, we might find that it actually reduces solar PV coming into the grid. Yes, it does kick the can further down the road, but is it a solution? No, not really. And I would argue, and I'll put up a chart now showing that the change to EVs is inevitable. It's going to happen whether we incentivize EVs or not. It's just we can have a choice. We can be at the forefront of this. It's probably too late to be at the forefront, but we can try and catch up, or we can be way behind this. We are way behind the rest of the world when it comes to EV adoption. So Norway, 3 in every 4 cars produced in Norway this year had a plug to them. The most popular selling car in the world's 5th largest economy, which is California, was the Tesla Model 3. The most popular new car sold in the UK was a Tesla Model 3. And these are 2020 statistics. Compared that to Australia, what are we? 1% or a fraction of 1% or less than 2%? We're pretty much nowhere to be seen, which is a really big shame, because Australians have always been very quick adopters of, very early adopters of new technology. And when it comes to electric vehicles, we're just way behind. Why? Because we are being disincentivized. This is disincentivized to purchase EVs through the luxury car tax and stamp duty, etc., particularly in Western Australia. So if you buy a car in the ACT, that equivalent, so a Tesla Standard Range Plus Model 3 costs $6,400 less to buy in Canberra than it does in Perth. And I've done a separate video on this subject, so feel free to look that up, and I split it up into every individual state in Australia as well, so you can have a look what it costs to buy a car in different states. It's really a shame that our governments, and this is not being political, so whether it's Labor or Liberal, both governments have done absolutely zero to incentivize electric vehicles. Some people will say, well, we shouldn't be incentivizing one technology versus another. We should have a level playing field and let the free market decide. I agree, 100%, absolutely, we should. But then we need to also take away the fossil fuel subsidies. And fossil fuel subsidies are, we subsidize fossil fuels to the tune of $29 billion US every single year. If you divide that by the number of taxpayers in Australia, that works out to $3,500 per taxpayer per year. That means over a 10-year period, a 2-taxpayer family in Australia will have spent $70,000 of your hard-earned cash that goes towards taxes, that goes towards subsidizing fossil fuels. What do we get in return for that? Well, we keep the fossil fuel sector happy, which is good because the fossil fuel sector makes a lot of donations to both political parties. But what else do we get? What does the average person in Australia get for this? Well, we get air pollution, which causes 2,500 to 3,000 premature deaths in Australia every year. We get CO2 and greenhouse gas emissions, so we accelerate climate heating. We get a higher road toll. We get less regional tourism. We lose and miss out on an opportunity to create jobs at the time that we need it the most. We need, post COVID-19, we need to be rejuvenating the economy. This is the way to do it. We should be creating a whole new industry which is non-existent in Australia at the moment. It's a real shame that our state government here in Western Australia has set on a report published by or put together by a professor at the University of Western Australia. They've been sitting on this report for over 12 months. This report said they would cost $23 to about $28 million from memory to put fast DC chargers and spread them right across Western Australia. What have they decided to do instead? They've decided to instead spend $22 million on bringing the target for some sort of a legitimate renewable hydrogen scenario, bring that forward from 2040 to 2030. Look, I'm not against especially renewable hydrogen in any way whatsoever. I completely support it, and yes, I think we should be spending $22 million. I think, yes, we should be giving FMG $2 million towards their hydrogen vehicle trial, but we should be doing that in addition to, rather than instead of, because what has this 22 million come? It's come instead of 23 to 28 million dollars. That might sound like a lot of money, and to a consumer, yes, it is. But for a state government, it's a drop in the ocean. It's equivalent of the cost of a on-ramp onto the freeway. So it's next to nothing, and we've decided to spend this money on studies into renewable hydrogen, into something that may or may not happen in 10 or 20 years' time. And look, I completely agree, yes, there is a business case to be made for exporting renewable hydrogen to the rest of the world in 10 or 20 years' time, but EVs are here and now. EVs, I mean, don't kid yourself that we're going to have hydrogen-powered SUVs for the average family, or a hydrogen-powered sedan that the average mum and dad's going to be driving. Where's the infrastructure for refueling these hydrogen cells, fuel cells, going to come from? With EVs, we have every home has a power point. Every shopping centre has a power. Every petrol station already has a power point. So we have the infrastructure here already. All we need is a few fast charging DC fast charging stations to be rolled out across Western Australia. The cost is minuscule in the scheme of things, and it should have been prioritised before spending that money on studies of something that may or may not happen in 10 or 20 years' time. So that's enough. I won't bore you with my rant anymore. I think I've said enough on the subject. Look, these, like I said, just my first initial thoughts. I've only had a second or so to read that article which Rob has sent through. So Rob, you know who you are, so thank you very much for sending that article through. It's really got me motivated to make a video about this. So yeah, really appreciate that. Look, if you don't agree with my thoughts, I completely encourage a civil debate. Feel free to tell me what you think in your comment section, in the comment section below. Feel free to send me an email, or feel free to send me a tweet. I'm on Twitter as well, so I include those details at the bottom of this screen as well. Just one last quick thing. If you are in the market for buying a Tesla, the scheme has changed a little bit in the last few months. So unfortunately, I've had a few people that I've referred to buy a Tesla. They've gone ahead and bought a Tesla, but they forgot to use my referral code when they paid their deposit. Previously, we were able to email Tesla and plead for them to retrospectively apply the credit, but they're no longer doing that. So if you forget to use your referral code at the time that you pay for your deposit, you'll miss out on 1,500 kilometers of free supercharging, or 1,000 miles. And the code is, you can use that anywhere around the world. So look, definitely make sure you use the code. Doesn't have to be my code. Obviously, I would prefer that you use my code. To show you my appreciation for using my code, I'll do what I've done with other people that have used my code, and that's to offer myself to provide any assistance that I can throughout the whole process. So if you have any question, if I can't answer it myself, so I'll make myself available, but if I can't answer it myself, there's a fantastic community of Tesla owners here in WA. I can ask any of them on your behalf. I can go to Tesla and ask them on your behalf as well. I can introduce you to, whoever you need to be introduced to get your questions answered as well. So more than happy, obviously all for electric vehicles and sustainable energy. So more than happy to help out in any way I can. That really is it for me for now. So as always, stay safe, stay sustainable, and stay ahead of the curve. Ciao.